Theranos is again getting national attention. This time it's the company's former chief operator, Sunny Balwani. He's on trial for fraud. Our business and tech reporter, Scott Budman, has been reporting on this case every step of the way. He joins us live outside the courthouse. So what's going on in this trial now?
Well, good evening, Jessica. Today we heard from two former Theranos employees in the trial of Sunny Balwani. Each worked in the lab, each on Theranos blood testing machines, and as we heard today, each testified that they eventually realized those blood testing machines were not going to work. We start with Erica Chung. She's the former employee turned whistleblower who testified today on the stand that she and other employees deceived regulators, often answering to their chief operating officer, the man on trial, Sunny Balwani. Meanwhile, during cross-examination, Balwani's defense team tried to convince the jury that Chung and others were not working under the direction of Balwani, but rather answering to the company's CEO, Elizabeth Holmes.
The best strategy is for Sunny Balwani to paint himself in the same light as other defrauded investors. And to do this, he needs to convince a jury that he wasn't running ops for Theranos, but he was rather an investor in the company and a mentor to Elizabeth Holmes.
Scott, it's interesting because during the Holmes trial, so much of the Silicon Valley culture was on trial, and especially a look at the fact that she was a woman CEO. Is it different this time in terms of that culture with Balwani?
You know, it is. Elizabeth Holmes not only was a woman, and so she stood out in the rarity of having a young woman who led a company, but also she was a celebrity. Sunny Balwani is not a celebrity, but you're right, it is the startup culture on trial. Jessica, you could spend a decent amount of your paycheck streaming shows right now about Silicon Valley startups and their culture, including one on Theranos, not to mention one on WeWork, and then another one on Uber, all about the highs and crashing lows of Silicon Valley startup culture. And you have to admit, some of the young people on the jury probably are at least aware of these shows. And so a lot of the talk and a lot of the chatter is about just that, the startup culture and the celebrities that lead these startups.
And the idiosyncratic behavior, too, that we see in some of those shows, and whether that's really real in that culture. So what happens in the next coming days?
Well, we just started to hear from a former lab director, Mark Pandori. He was testifying to the accuracy and inaccuracy of the components that were inside the machines that gave customers less than accurate test results. So it's likely that we will talk about those machines and then eventually get to some of the Theranos customers and patients who got the inaccurate results.
And so the saga continues. All right. Thank you, Scott.